Hello. Is that better? That's better. Is that better? Yeah, okay, cool. All right. Hi, everybody. I have the pleasure of doing a keynote, which is really kind of awesome because it means I get to do sort of more generic, big picture, non-technical stuff so that you guys can have a chance to wake up or maybe take a quick nap before the people that are doing really hardcore technical stuff come up and you have to pay attention. So today I'm going to talk about basically a principle that we use at GitHub a lot called first principles. It's just sort of a way of thinking about business and product development that I think has been very helpful to us, so I kind of wanted to talk about it and explain it and see if it would be helpful to you and give us a topic of conversation while we're drinking tonight. So, I am Chacon, and I work at GitHub. The sort of premise of this talk is this quote, which is "Software is eating the world." This is a thing that Marc Andreessen has been talking about a lot recently, and it's really interesting to me. And it is about how software is fundamentally changing almost every industry in business, right? So from entertainment to farming, software is changing the way that it is done at a fundamental level from the way that it was done even 10 years ago. From everything from bookstores, so, trying to find a book, you go to Amazon now, not Barnes & Noble. Netflix versus Blockbuster. I don't know how many of these, sorry. Sorry, there we go, power. The computer doesn't like it when it runs out of power, generally. It actually says my computer has been suspended so I can address the situation, which I think is really kind of amazing. Sorry guys. There we go. Stay. Power adapters are amazing. All right, so sorry about that. iTunes versus record stores, Skype versus phone companies, right? Every major industry has been started to be interrupted by software, has been changed by software, is continuing to be changed by software, and you guys are in the greatest position for this because you're software developers. And you're in this weird combination of artist and engineer, right? Of having to be creative and having to be technical at the same time. And especially in the Ruby community, I see this a lot, where you're not graduating from college to make a bunch of money and go into this profession that you think is going to be great for you. You're doing it because you love to do it, because it's fascinating to you, because it's interesting to you, right? That's why, especially why you've chosen Ruby instead of Java, or instead of .NET, or instead of something where, when you first get into it, could probably make you more money, right? It's because you love the beauty of the system. It's because you love programming as an intrinsic motivation, as an intrinsic value. It's interesting to you. So the interesting thing about what Marc Andreessen bases his thesis on is the digital infrastructure that we're faced with today, right? So 10 years ago, what I love about this graph is that it has no numbers or titles. So I hate graphs in general, so I thought it would be funny to put in one that had no meaning. The numbers are actually, there is purpose behind them though. 10 years ago, this is how many, we had about 50 million people that had access to broadband internet in the world. And today we have over 2 billion, right, roughly estimated. So this is the sort of difference in the number of people that now have access to broadband internet, the number of people who have mobile phones, who have a phone in your pocket where you can program it easily, you can have it do anything, everybody's always connected all the time. The sort of information communication topologies that are possible now are much different than they were. We're just going straight up Spotlight. That's cool. Are much different than they were a long time ago. So everything's poised for disruption now. There's so many things that we have that we can do now. I mean, if you think about the last big communication disruption that you can, before the internet that you can think of was what? The telephone? The fax machine? I mean, there's not a whole lot to be able to change businesses on before the internet, and now everything's different. So what is useful is to let your frustration guide you, right? If you look at the way that things are now, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, no matter what you look at, right? But if you get frustrated by something, if you go through your daily life and you start taking stock of what frustrates you in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, ask yourself, can software solve this, right? having access to mobile phones and broadband internet for my whole company or my whole family, can it solve this problem? And most of the time, a lot of the time, the answer is yes, right? You just have to imagine what the best scenario would be like given the tools that we have now, and ask yourself, do we have that tool yet? And most of the time, the answer is no, right? This is a quote from Richard Branson that I thought was really interesting. All startups should be thinking, what frustrates me and how can I make it better? Because that is the seed of a fantastic product, right? It's something that removes friction, something that removes frustration from your daily life. It's how you should choose what to work on, and it's how you should choose how to work as well. So it's not just applicable to product, which I think it is. I think you can look at your life and say, it's very hard to get a taxi here, and so you create something like Uber Cab or Taxi Magic or something like that, something that solves your immediate problem in a way that is the best solution, right? The best experience for you. But it's not just product, it's also about how you work, right? What your daily life is. How your business functions. It's equally applicable to that. So at GitHub, what we do is we call this the theory of first principles. We call every single time that we're faced with some business problem, with some personnel problem, with we're not communicating well, or people are frustrated by something, by the expense report policy or by whatever. What we do is we ask ourselves, in a lot of cases, if it's a big problem, let's go back to first principles. What are we fundamentally trying to solve with this problem, right? What is fundamentally frustrating to us? What are we trying to do with it? And what is the best way to get there? Not what we don't look at what other companies have done. We don't look at what we've done at our previous jobs. That's not interesting. What's interesting is we're in a new age. We have all of this technology available to us. We have a whole bunch of software developers around. With tools that we can, rapid prototype stuff very, very quickly. So what would be the best possible thing to do? And then let's do that the simplest way, right? Let's go back to first principles. What are we actually trying to solve? And what do we need from it? Not what has happened before. So in philosophy, a first principle is a basic foundational proposition. It is the thing that you can't go farther past, right? It's the sort of earliest proposition. Foundation for something. So it allows you to reimagine stuff, right? It allows you to look at different aspects of your business or different aspects of your product and say, assuming that there was that nobody had any ideas coming into this, let's just pretend we're reinventing it from the beginning. What would we do? What would the perfect thing be? So as an example of this, we can go through products, right? We could go through stuff like getting a taxi or things like writing code or collaborating or whatever problems you're trying to solve. But I think it's more interesting to talk about work because we all, for the most part, have had the same type of job, right? We're all in the same industry. We've all been doing the same thing. We've all been running companies basically the same way. For a very, very long time, and almost everybody in this room works relatively similarly. This is starting to change a little bit, but I think it's interesting to look at our workplace because it's something we all more or less have in common, and start asking questions about individual things in the workplace, and asking yourself, what is it for? What are the first principles of this thing? What was it meant to address, and is it still the best tool to address that? So, for example, meetings, right? Why do we have meetings? What is the point of meetings? Of saying everybody, do a stand-up at 9 a.m. or everybody come into the office and meet together. What is the point of that, right? I'm not really going to talk about how GitHub specifically has addressed these problems. I've done talks like that before, and Zach has done a lot of talks like that as well. But that's not interesting to me. What's interesting to me is asking the question, because we keep changing the way that we're approaching these problems. And I think it's interesting for you to think about this. And if you come up with better ideas for this stuff, to share it the way that Zach has been sharing it, so we can all figure out something better, right? Figure out the best way to do this. So meetings are interesting, right? What gets accomplished at a meeting? Like, look at the structure of it. Is it the best way of getting to that point, right? What are you actually trying to get out of it? And is meeting with a bunch of people in a room for an hour or half an hour, whatever your meeting size is that the best way of solving that? Or are there different ways of making that communication happen, right? Cubicles, right? Or your work environment in general. A lot of places are going to open workspace. Is open workspace even? So instead of cubicles, think about workspace, right? Is your workspace the best way of solving whatever problem workspaces are designed for, right? Should it be open, or is that too loud? Should it be cubes? Should it be offices? What are you trying to do? What is the best way of solving the problem that you're trying to solve? Should you have an office at all, or should everybody just work from home and you guys should all get together to drink every month or something like that to talk about the larger issues of the company? The workday, right? How many of you work 8 to 5? I'm actually kind of curious. I won't ask that many questions as a poll because I hate polls, but how many of you work more or less 8 to 5? Okay, so actually a good percentage of the room. I thought it was going to be a little bit less than that. But, I mean, people in technology tend to be a little bit more flexible with this because it doesn't really matter, right? Again, you're creative. You guys are artists as much as you are engineers. So, you generally don't ask artists to come into the office 8 to 5. You have them work whenever they're creative, because that's the whole point, right? And it should be with you too. You're trying to solve these problems. You're trying to reimagine the future and provide products and services for people to help vastly improve their lives and vastly improve the economy. So why is 8 to 5 a thing? What is the point of 8 to 5? Is it just to facilitate face-to-face time? Is that actually helpful, right? Should it be, should you care at all when anybody is working at any time as long as they're getting things done? Again, offices at all. Is there a point to an office? What is the point of the office? And how can you change your office space to be whatever the point of having an office space is at all? Or should you get rid of it entirely, right? Or should you break it up into several small spaces? Should you have people all over the world, or should you try and get them into one city? Right? What are the problems you're trying to address with these, the way that you're addressing these problems, and is it the best way of doing it? Management. So, if any of you in the room are managers, I apologize now. Do you need managers? It's not really do you need managers. The question is, what is the point of a manager? Why do managers exist? Why is it not just a bunch of people that produce work, that produce product, right? Like, what are the problems that managers are introduced to help, right? Is it communication? Is it direction? Is it staffing, hiring and firing, determining salary? Is it planning, right? What functions of management are useful to the organization? And as a follow-up, can you write that in software, right? Which of those functions can you write? Right? And say, okay, here's some software that takes over the planning and the direction, maybe the salary, maybe the hiring and firing, right? How can you actually do this? Maybe you're crowdsourcing, right? Should this person be hired, and if they get, plus ones from 50% of the company, then they're hired, right? Think about it, right? Why can't you do that? Or something similar to that? What would the best thing be? What would the most interesting thing be? The hiring process itself, this is something that still kind of, I think, eludes GitHub. I think we're getting better at it, but it's still something that is not easy, right? Is trying to figure out how to hire somebody. Like, think about the normal process. I assume most of you guys have the same basic tech hiring process, which is you phone screen somebody, you call them up, you ask them a bunch of technical questions, right? How do you sort an array, whatever. And then if they don't answer those properly over the phone, then they don't get to come in and talk to you, which I think is sort of a shame because it has nothing to do with what they do on a daily basis if you were to hire them, right? You don't call up programmers and say like, hey, Phil, explain to me how to write this so I can type it into the computer, right? That's not how we work, right? So, one of the things that we'll fly people in to GitHub and we'll talk to them in person for a day, but even that, I feel, is sort of weird because that's not how GitHub works either, right? It doesn't really match up with what we're doing. I feel like we haven't really solved this, but it's an interesting question to ask, right? Are the things that you're screening for in your hiring process the actual qualities that you're trying to find in people that you're trying to hire, right? Or are you just doing whatever you did at your last job because it's a way of having some objective way of saying yes or no on somebody? Vacation, sick time, this is interesting to me as well. Why do we have vacation? I don't know how long vacation is here. I assume it's 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks? Okay, you guys aren't America, I keep forgetting. Like 3 days of vacation is fine, right? So why? Why do we do this? So in America we have generally two 2 or 3 weeks of paid time off. Sometimes that's like 2 weeks of vacation and 1 week of sick time if they really want to be pedantic about it. But generally it's, some places like, we're really awesome, we'll do 3 weeks of anything. If you don't get sick, you get to have more vacation. Which is stupid on several levels. One is that makes sick people come into the office, right? Because they want to save their vacation time, and then that makes other people sick, and then nobody gets work done well. So, but think about the problem set. Why have vacation at all? Like, why have an amount of time that people can take off for vacation? What is the purpose of having you can only leave for 3 weeks? Is it because you think people will take advantage of it? Is it because you think people will just leave and never come back and just assume that they're going to keep getting paychecks, right? Even though they're not doing any work? Because I don't think that that's true. I think we happen to be in an industry where, again, everybody loves what they do, right? Most of you did not get into programming because it was the money. You got into programming because you had some programmable calculator, Altair 8080 or something, probably not that, but something ignorant that you did something stupid with. I bet you if we all went and drank tonight and we sat down, you'd be like, my first programming thing, and you'll come up with some really boring story about some really old piece of technology that you hacked because you loved doing it, right? Almost all of us have that story because we love what we do. So this doesn't make sense, right? Or does it? Does it make sense to have vacation time, right? Or can you just assume that people will take off when they need to recharge and people will come back to do the thing that they love to do? Long hours. This is something that's really interesting to me because it depends on the company, but a lot of companies, especially in San Francisco, I've seen a lot of sort of the hot startup ones have this as like a badge of honor, right? You work really long hours. I work 12 hours a day, like you're a lawyer. I don't understand why, right? You are creative people. You should be working when you're creative, and I don't think you can be really hugely creative for 15 hours at a time, right? Just constantly. It doesn't make any sense. And you get shitty code, you get problems that you have to go back and fix. It's not good for the creative environment. So it's not good for families. It's not good for trying to hire people that are not 24-year-olds out of college, and that is severely damaging to the business. And so if wow, that went really high pitched. Oh my. So, excuse me. So if that is a badge of honor in your workplace, if that is something that is encouraged in any way, that, somebody leaves early and you're like, going home early, huh, Steve? Or, Pablo, or what, I don't know. Then you should rethink that. Rethink, is this something that we should be encouraging? Or should we be encouraging, yes, go home, spend time with your family, come back when you're recharged. Don't work 10-hour days, don't work 15-hour days, or however long is long, I don't know. Stay good, stay fresh, stay creative, because that's more important. Expense reports. So, the other thing on this is just with hiring. You don't want people to burn out and have to hire. It's so awful to hire, right? You want to keep good people when you have them. So don't force them to burn out. Expense reports is interesting to me. This is something that we've been dealing with because we travel a lot. You guys, I know some of you travel all the time. Most of the speakers here that I know from other speaking gigs. But I assume a lot of you will travel around, will have expense reports you have to do for your company from time to time, and ask yourself, what is the purpose of an expense report? What are we trying to solve with this problem? Is there an easier way of doing this? Can we have can we give credit cards to everyone in the company and just say, don't be a dick, right? Is that enough? Because it's possible, right? I have seen companies do that. We don't do that at GitHub. I kind of would like to, but we don't do that right now. But, why not? What is the point? What are you really afraid that people are going to do? And if somebody does abuse it, and say your company loses $1,000 or something and you find out about it, isn't it worth $1,000 to find out that they are not a trustworthy person, right? So, commission. This is interesting. How many of you have sales organizations? You know what? I hate polling. If you have sales organizations, think to yourself in your mind. You're like, do I have sales? Yes, I do. If you have sales organizations, how do you incentivize them, right? Is there a commission system in place? And if there is, why? What does that solve? Why are sales teams incentivized differently than you guys? To me, it doesn't really make any sense. When you split up your workforce and you treat them differently, it's odd to me because everybody in your company should be they should be treated the same. They should be important to the company, right? If you go into Pixar or Disney, it's interesting to me because the animators have these little houses that they can decorate, and it's really awesome, and then all the programmers are like shoved into a basement somewhere, and they're like, make us, stuff that makes hair look good. And then the animators, have their thing, but it seems odd to me that they're also not treated like like creative people, right? And commission structure is the same thing, right? When people talk about salespeople, they use phrases like coin-driven operators. These are English phrases. I don't know but like churn and burn. They think of them. You put a stick in front of them, stick behind them, carrot in front of them. Put a carrot in front of them, and you're like, if you reach your sales goal of whatever, then you'll get more money. Go get that more money. And then they're like, okay, I'll do whatever's necessary to get that more money, even if it means burning my customers and making everybody pissed. Like I just want to Glen Ross this and make my money at the end. And that's not good, right? It's not good for your customers. It's not good for your organization. Why can salespeople not love what they do, not be interested in helping people understand the product and be successfthis in deploying it, and be compensated the same way as everybody else? And the bonuses are the same thing. This is a lot with executives and stuff too, but sometimes they do this with the whole company where you're like, if we hit our numbers, then everybody gets bonuses, which is, to me, a weird way of incentivizing people, right? People should be incentivized. The job should be interesting in and of itself. It shouldn't be, if you get to this point, we'll give you even more money, right? You should be saying, let's figure out what people need to be happy and fulfilled and give them that. And then, if we're doing well, then the whole company's doing well, and we can revel in that. Maybe we can do a bonus or something, but don't put a stick out there because that changes the motivation of people. It goes from doing something that they love to do because they want to help the company or they want to have a purpose in the company to being, I just want this money for myself, right? And it changes the motivations and it changes the interestingness of what it is that you're working on. So, anyways, those are some things to think about, right? This can be applied to all sorts of stuff. Look at something that's fundamental in your company, something that has been solved in the same way for a long time, and ask yourself, does this make sense in this age? Does it make sense when everybody is connected, when everybody is online, when everybody has mobile phones? Is there a better way of doing these things with software that is very easy for us to write now, right? Can you write software to replace meetings? Can you write software to replace offices, right? Can chat rooms replace an office? Can it do a better job? Can it do it more asynchronously and more interestingly than what an office actually provides? Can you write software to improve the hiring process, to replace it, right, with something that is more useful, easier to find better people for the positions that you're looking for? Can you write software to replace your boss, right? Maybe you don't want to tell them that the answer to that is yes, but think about it. Right? Because in a lot of cases, the answer is yes. There are structures that are set up for a time that is not, that does not have the technology that we have now. So, imagining a workplace, right? The work of tomorrow. Imagine there's no office hours. Imagine there's no meetings. Imagine there's no vacations. Imagine there's no assignments. Imagine that everybody in your team gets together and figures out what they're going to work on without having somebody dictate it, right? Is that a better or worse way of making decisions, right? Is crowdsourcing the decisions, the goals of the company better than individuals doing it, or not, right? I feel like an argument could be made either way. It's interesting to me to see what people think about that, right? Or if software can solve these problems. So what is interesting to me by looking at this list is this is very similar to the way that open source projects are run, right? I assume almost everybody in this room has contributed to or hopefully started or at the very least used open source software, right? So we all know what open source software is and how it works and possibly the process of how it gets created. And this is how open source software gets created, right? The open source business can be something that runs relatively similar to this, right? If you think about how open source software gets created, there are no bosses, really, that you can fork something and take it off on your own if you want to, if you don't like how the maintainer is doing it, or there's not really any assignments. It's not like Linus is like, you do this, because that is not probably going to work very well. largely because he's a dick too. But there's no meet, like you don't get in a room and meet and stuff, right? People, and yet this way, good software still gets written this way, right? I mean, maybe not the best software in all cases, but good software, functional software that everybody in this room uses gets written this way. So let's look at this model, let's look at other models that are like this and take lessons from it and say, are these lessons that I can apply to my company, that I can apply to our business? So that is sort of the concept of first principles, right? Looking at what is something fundamentally targeting, what are you trying to solve with it, and is the way that we're doing it now the best possible way of doing it, or should we roll it all the way back and build up a different process to solve that problem with the tools and the network and the infrastructure that we have today that we didn't have 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I also encourage you to change constantly, right? GitHub has been constantly changing the way that we've been running all of this stuff and constantly questioning this and saying, is this still the best way of doing it? And especially as the company grows, right, is what we did at 10 people the same thing that we should be doing at 110 people? And most of the time the answer is yes, this is still working well. Sometimes we need to make small tweaks here and there, but you should be constantly looking at it and not having it as a religion of some sort. So there are some examples of companies that are doing this just as a way of at least knowing that other companies are questioning some of these motives. Valve is an interesting example. They have a handbook that they've put out, which I find fascinating. So if you Google Valve handbook, read through this. It's a really interesting, this is what they give people on their first day of work. It's a fascinating way of looking at a company that has thought of things very, very differently than most traditional companies. And I think it's worth looking at and reading through and asking yourself, is this something where they're addressing a problem in a more interesting or more fundamentally sound way than the way that we are? Gore is an interesting company as well. They have thousands and thousands of people, I think 4,000 or 5,000 employees now, and they're all organized into little tiny teams in this lattice structure, which is really interesting. They've rethought the way that management works. And there's a lot of stuff written on them, so you can go through and do that. GitHub, we've rethought a lot of this stuff as well. We're a little bit smaller than these companies. Valve is about 300 or so, but it means that a lot of these processes can scale, and a lot of companies are rethinking stuff. So what I'm fundamentally interested in is having you guys think about this stuff, trying to come up with ideas and sharing it with everybody so that we can all talk about it, we can all learn from it, we can all try out different ways of solving these problems in a more interesting way. So, as sort of a last thing, this is something that I think is an interesting way of phrasing this, the rise of the network. So, because of sort of the new communication topologies, the ways that people can communicate in smaller groups and in interconnected groups have changed a lot of companies. There's a quote that I read by Jim Collins, who is a guy who wrote a couple of very interesting books, Good to Great and Built to Last, and there's a couple other ones. But there's a quote that I read in some interview of his where he said, we may be moving to a world of networks well-led as opposed to organizations well-managed, right? And I think this is really interesting in the context of management. Can your company be more effective if it is a bunch of small networks that are led well, right? Where there's somebody saying, here's the end goal, and then all of these smaller groups sort of attack it, or having a big hierarchical organization, right? I think we're moving in the direction of having these networks rather than this hierarchy because we have the tool set to allow that now. And so it's interesting. I would love to hear what you guys think. You know, if you ponder this, if you think about this, what you think the possibilities of these organizations could be, right? And how they can work and how they can work well. So I think the future of work is well-led networks built on first principles. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Now, if anyone has questions, we could. So.
Of what?
You asked this question about who's working right now 8 to 5.
Yeah.
Actually, I think. Hello? And you also were working about, we are kind of artists and engineers,
Yes.
and this thing has a feedback. I work 8 to 5, and then I go home or go do sports and stuff, but actually I don't really work 8 to 5. I'm in the office from 8 to 5. And after I'm done doing things with my kids and sports and all the stuff, I just sit at home and continue creating stuff. So where I'm creating stuff when I'm in the office, and after that. So that's why what I didn't like about the whole thing was this, call it work, because lawyers go to work, people that build stuff and I don't know, and some industries, metal things, they go to work, we create things, and that you do 8 to 5, or at home, or on the weekend, or during your vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah.
So what's the question? What the definition of...
There wasn't a question,
I mean,
it was just a notice I wanted to put there. It's
yeah,
like,
so I mean, there's a couple of interesting...
let's not call it work, let's call it office time, or joint time. Or,
So that, I mean, it depends on your definition of work and whether it has a negative connotation or not, right? Like I love my work. I love working. And I kind of think of, I mean, this is sort of working, right? I mean, I'm representing GitHub to some degree and, you know, talking about software development but I mean, everything that I do for my job, I consider work and I enjoy it. I don't think of it negatively. And not every culture does, right? I mean, they're you know, especially in places that have a high unemployment, like work is a good thing. So, I mean, you have work at all, right? But as far as like the 8 to 5 stuff goes, I'm not saying that people shouldn't work 8 to 5. I'm saying not everybody should work 8 to 5, right? There are people that work, I basically work 8 to 5 because I have kids, and you know, I'm married and stuff, and so I like to go home and relax and turn off and like be able to reset. And not like that happens to be the way that I work. But there are other people that work, you know, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's just when they like to work, right? And so the point is that not everybody needs necessarily, in my company certainly, but possibly in a lot of other companies where, you know, people want to see asses in seats, right? That is not really necessary, right? That should be questioned. That was sort of the point of that. Yeah.
So I guess if a lot of employees fill out the same kind of road, that makes it easy. But what when there are different roles, say ops and developers, and designers and project people, and they have different goals in mind. So that's the usual ones just push progress, right? But operations people generally just prefer stability.
Yeah. So that's a great question. Is different roles, right? So I mean, you have to ask that question for each group, for each role, right? The ones where, I mean, largely what I'm saying is not to define as little as possible, to not say you have to do this and this and this, to let groups define their own terms for a lot of this stuff. So we have ops people, we have pager schedules, we have people that have to be on call, that have to be sober, you know, at certain times in rotation, and we never said that. The group decided that was something that was necessary, that they had done at previous jobs, that worked well. We had not instituted it because we weren't really instituting anything, and they said, you know, we need to institute this. And so, you know, one of the, it wasn't an executive, right? It was one of the ops team was like, we need to put in place this pager duty thing, and so now we have that, right? And so that continues, right? Groups will self-organize when you say, solve this problem, which is keeping our servers up and fast, and we don't give a shit how you do it, right? And then the team can figure out how to organize themselves well. Yeah.
But you don't have like global way of handling conflict between these different mindsets, but it kind of inherent to the group. Like if your role is for some reason or the other to keep stuff stable, you want to be a bit conservative perhaps. So you don't have a way of like dealing with conflict between those like different kinds of people who want different end goals, I guess.
I guess so. I just can't think of groups in my experience at GitHub that have different end goals, right? I mean, we're all trying to make our product awesome and fast and, you know, useful and stuff. And so we talk across teams and we try to get everybody together every once in a while so that everybody, you know, there are friends that are sort of cross connections between groups so that people aren't infighting. But if you don't have stuff like bonuses and commissions and things like that, where people are at different ends, that I feel like that infighting is much less. It's much less at GitHub. It's almost non-existent at GitHub as groups, right? We're like, fuck the ops team. Like that never happens, because those people are good at what they do, and half of them are my friends, and so that works out well. Maybe that changes as we get larger. Maybe we have to readdress that question at some point. But right now, that has not been an issue. Yeah.
Hi, I've got a question specific about GitHub, because you guys, from what we can tell, you seem to be doing it differently to how a lot of hierarchical companies seem to work. I'd really like to hear about how your conversation about career progression goes. When people first join, they might want to change, or even just when they think about, okay, so I've joined now, what happens over the next few years? Because when you have a very hierarchical structure, there's a very clear path, but
that's a good point.
Very different.
Career progression is a good point, and so that it kind of comes under the same thing of questioning what is the point of career progression, right? Is it salary increases? Is it so that people report to you? Is it so that what else do you get with career progression, right? Career progression in a lot of places means you change your role, right? You start out as a developer or something, you become like a manager, which is something that you have no training for, and and so in our company, since we have basically no management, that part of the career progression doesn't really make sense. You never become a manager, so you can't really become an executive, because we're not really. The only thing that executives at GitHub do is we have firing bits, right? We can say yes or no at the end of the entire hiring process, and we're starting to fan that out. So right now, there are more people we're starting to give the hiring-firing bit, where we're like, you can say yes or no. That is literally the only thing. And so if that's a career goal, I can't imagine that that's a career goal, where you're like, I really want the opportunity to be able to say yes to a hire, especially because the opposite side of that is awful, which is having to fire somebody if they don't work out, which is you lose. It's fucking awful, right? So it's not. So then the other thing is just salary. And so on that one, we basically just have a set percentage that your salary increases year over year. So as the longer you work at GitHub, the more your salary goes up. So there's no questions asked. We don't really have like a schedule or anything. If you're good enough to stay there for a year, generally, if you're there for a year, you're going to be there until you quit, which hasn't happened yet. But so there's no trying to figure that out, right? There's no sort of negotiating with people and saying okay, you're now a director, and so you get a 10% raise or something like that, right? If you stay here for 2 years, you get a 10% raise. So we don't really have those questions. If it's an example of trying to get a job in another place where you're like, I was a director there, so I should be a director here, then you're screwed, because we don't. It's just not. We're kind of hoping people don't leave, but there's nothing really to do. We can give you any title you want. Actually, I think we even let people kind of choose their own titles. I don't really remember. I'm not sure people really do it. We hire people with the technical title like developer badass and stuff. So, you could become like a director of development badass. I don't really know.
You going for 3 or 4 years now?
Yeah, 4.
And how many employees?
120.
And 0 turnover?
No. Yeah, there's been a couple people we've let go, but nobody's left.
Sorry. One last question.
Okay.
I think that there was.
Also, okay, we can go here. We're sponsoring the drink up tonight, so I love talking about this stuff. So you can ask whatever then.
Yeah, I was curious. GitHub makes products for software developers, so it's easy to apply this thinking because everyone knows about software. But what about if you work in a company where software is only half of it or small of it? So what's your experience with all classic?
That's true. So trying to bring in the customer, right? Trying to bring in what the product needs to be to make the customer happy. It depends. So it just depends on whether you cannot be that customer, right? If you're writing taxi magic type stuff, then you obviously are. It's easy to test it out. We do write software that we don't really use. So we write like GitHub Enterprise, but we have stuff for enterprise stuff, and we don't run as an enterprise. So we have to have our customers give us feedback. Like, we would really, really like to be able to plug this into Active Directory, and we're like, Google Active Direct Microsoft. Fuck. So we have to do that and make it good, and that continues, right? We get that feedback loop from our customers. So we rely on we can't dog food that. So we rely on customer feedback for that, and that works well for us in that circumstance, I think. So, but I mean, that is highly dependent on what you're doing, right? I've worked in the last couple of companies that I've worked in. I feel like all of this stuff would have been perfectly relevant. Like we never had like customers come in and stuff. We would just build stuff we thought they would like and see if they used it, right? I mean, I think a lot of places are like that. So I don't know that changes hugely. Maybe though. It depends on the if you're building nuclear reactors, then yeah, you're fucked. I don't know. Maybe this will work. I don't know if I want to test that out. But maybe. Okay, thank you very much, guys.